Washington has some high hopes for their spring transfer portal acquisitions.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sport stops sporting like you want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show today. We're going to be talking about baseball coach Eddie Smith. As a former college baseball player myself, I'm really excited to talk a little bit about what we got to hear from him at his press conference on Tuesday. That was really great. But before we get there, we're going to talk about guys on both sides of the ball. We'll start with the offense, then going to move to the defense that were acquired in the spring transfer portal window that we think can have a major have a major impact this fall.
Yeah, and there's, again, plenty of guys to choose from, to be clear. Now, this, again, takes out Will Rogers. This takes out Jonah Coleman. This takes out Jeremiah Herman, that entire winter class, just for the everydayers to understand the principle here. So the first guy that I want to talk about is the guy that probably will start at center, but as we discussed before the show, could actually bounce around the line depending on what the availability is with some other players, and that's D'Angelo Titialii. Multi-year starter at Portland State over the past couple of years, actually got some run at left guard along with center and right guard. I do think he is going to come in and, be that first center in fall camp when we open up in August. So whenever we get to fall camp, Titialii will probably be the first center there. But when you look at the options at right guard, I think he just as much could have an impact there, depending on if Zach Henning is able to progress from the spring to the fall. I know you mentioned before the show, he is an option there. So I think there's plenty of options where you can go. But having an experienced guy at center, I think, is kind of what makes Titialii so important to me, because when you look at the other options, Zach Henning got a little bit of run, but not a ton of run. Landon Hatch is coming back from the injury, so we can't necessarily bank on that, especially at the beginning of fall camp.
Yep.
That's why you go out and get a veteran Titialii who does also – I think it was kind of an interesting recruitment when he came out of Eastside Catholic, because he did end up going to Portland State. But I wonder, given the year that he came out, had it been a normal year, if he would have had a little more interest. Because what he showed at Portland State is a guy that can pull, can do a lot of different things as a guard, and it was a very dependable center for Portland State. So I think when you're looking at Will Rogers or Demond Williams, having a veteran center under there is going to be essential.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And he played a little bit of tackle as well. So this is a guy who has a whole lot of experience all over the offensive line. I really like this pick because I really do believe that he's going to start the year at center. And it's just nice to have a guy that has a little bit of production there, just has some experience and 32 games of experience. It's not just a little bit. Granted, it is against a lower level of competition, playing at Portland State, but I think this is somebody who could make a big impact this year. The first guy I want to go with is somebody who I'm really curious to see how much he gets used this year. He is one of the stars of, I'm sure, a lot of people's dynasty modes in college football 25, and that's running back Jordan Washington. Him and his 97 speed, where, even he said, hey, maybe that's a little low, and I respect that after watching his film. Truly, I do love the confidence, and I might agree with him there. But I think this is somebody who has a whole lot of different ways that he can get involved with the offense. If he's somebody that's returning kicks early on, I'm not going to be surprised. If he's used as, a scat back, as somebody who maybe lines up in the slot a little bit, I'm not going to be surprised. If he's somebody who early on in the year, there are 5-10 plays in the playbook that are specifically designed to get the ball in his hands and get him out into space, I'm not going to be surprised. I really like everything that it is that he brings to the table. As a former 4-star recruit, this is a guy that I'm really high on his potential, really high on his athleticism, obviously with that kind of speed. And he's somebody I'm going to be watching very closely because, behind these experienced running backs, whether it be Jonah Coleman, Cameron Davis, and Daniel Ngata, who, I'm still curious to see what kind of role he's going to have as well. There's a lot of room for some of these freshmen to get involved. And that's not just Jordan Washington, that's Adam Muhammad as well. But since we're talking about Jordan Washington, I feel that the two of them are going to find a way to, that seems like the long-term future of the room. So both those guys, I feel they're going to see the field early, they're going to see it often, and they're going to find a way to make an impact.
I couldn't agree more. And I think when you look at Jordan Washington's speed, there's no way he doesn't see the field. Does he play all 12 games? Probably not. But I certainly think you're going to have to give Jordan Washington's going to have to give the coaching staff a reason to not play him. And I have a hard time just based on his character and background. I don't think he's going to give much of an option to do that. So I could easily see him. And especially, I think we talked about it a couple of months ago where, especially in that special teams kick return game, I know Daniel Ngata had gotten some reps back there. Denzel Boston was the punt returner in spring. But when you have an electric freshman like that, given the running back room ahead of him, as you mentioned with Ngata, Coleman, et cetera, that's the perfect opportunity to get him involved, get the ball in his hands early, and just see what he can do with it. And so now going back to the offensive line, actually, you know what? I'm going to pivot here because I'm going to take somebody that you usually take, and I'm going to leave somebody who I usually talk about for you. I'm going to talk about Titialii because I've come around a little bit more. I'm coming around a little bit more on this. Again, it's not that I ever didn't believe in Latu's game, but when you look at his production and kind of the overall body of work that he's bringing to Washington from his time at Cal and Nevada, there's not a ton there, which is why I've always saw him more as a blocking tight end. But I think either way, having two veteran tight ends really helps this offense go, no matter who ends up being the quarterback or who ends up playing more at quarterback. Because obviously, if you have Will Rogers, you got a veteran already there, and it works no matter what. But if Damon Williams has to get in the game, having a pair of veteran tight ends with Quentin Moore and now Kaliki Latu, and again, how often are we going to see two tight end sets? Maybe not a ton. But either way, given the injury history and things like that, it's always good to have that extra depth just in case. Because let's say you want to have Quentin Moore as a blocker and flex Kaliki Latu outside in the red zone, and put Jeremiah Hunter on one side, Denzel on the other side. There's so many different types of mismatch that 6'7" frame that he has can bring to the table. I don't necessarily think he's going to be great between the red zones in terms of from the 20 to the 20, but my word, from inside the 20, he's going to cook a lot, I think. And that's, to me, where his value is going to be most important, because at the end of the day, you have enough skill position players to get the ball in the red zone. You need to find guys who can actually capitalize and not just settle for field goal after field goal, especially in the Big Ten, knowing how heavy the offenses are in that conference.
Absolutely. I like where you're going there. And with that being said, you know where I'm going with this. I got to talk about Maximus McCree here for a minute, where he's the guy that right now I have penciled in as the starting left tackle. And even though you wrote a great story about it over on Athlon Sports that he took last year off from football, this is a guy that I truly believe, if he can be in playing shape by the time fall camp rolls around, which I think you and I both expect him to be in, that he has all the tools needed to step in and start. And I think that it's really interesting to think about, because, it's going to be a huge question mark at the position no matter what. But I think right now he's the guy that offers the most upside, with Justin Hilkema, in my opinion, being close second at the position, because I like his movement skills. The JUCO All-American. Is it everything? No. Is it still something? Yes. And he's still been able to play a couple games in the Big Ten during his 1 year at Maryland before everything happened. He had to transfer home and all that. So I do think that this is somebody who, while it's not, necessarily leaps and bounds more experience than everybody else in position, it should still count for something. Practicing against a Big Ten team every day for a year should count for something. So I think that that's somebody who I'm going to keep an eye on this fall. And, I really wouldn't be surprised if, we get their first day of fall camp and he's the guy they roll out with the starting offense at left tackle. And he's somebody, if he does live up to his potential, he could really change this offensive line. And Lars, that being said, there are some real game changers that the staff has brought in on the defensive side too. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And I got to keep plugging this guy because I love watching him play so much. And, when we talk about Eddie Smith a little bit later, he's somebody who they didn't work together there at the same time, but Paul Skeens, that LSU alum, I really do get the feeling that he might end up winning the Cy Young. If he stays on the pace that he has been early on this year, he's proven he can be unhittable. That Splinker just might be the best pitch in baseball. And you can still get pretty good odds on him for Cy Young and Rookie of the Year over on FanDuel right now. Lars, where do you want to start on the defensive side here?
Oh my gosh. See, that was kind of the interesting thing as I was thinking through, like, who are the offensive transfers we can consider? Because there's so many. You know where I'm going to start? Is again another guy who played 2 games last season and then ended up not being able to finish the season due to an injury is Justin Harrington. Where we look at that nickel position in the spring, you had Jordan Shaw, you had Dyson McCutcheon, you had a couple other guys, maybe Camp Ebb slides down in there, whatever you want to call it. None of those guys, well, Cam's the closest to be fair, but none of those guys possess the body type that Justin Harrington has. Right. 6'2", 6'3", 212, 215, somewhere in that range. A truly violent, he played the cheetah position. Now it's going to be the Husky, the Star, so many different names. It's that hybrid nickel, like that you want a bigger player who knows how to cover, has the speed to cover, but can also come in and lay the lumber in the run game. And that's a guy where you look at what he did at Oklahoma for a couple of years, mostly as a reserve. This is kind of this perfect season to put it all together. He was the #1 JUCO safety in the country when he came out before he went to Oklahoma. So similar to Maximus McCree, all the talent is there in the world. He just hasn't, for whatever reason or form, been able to show that, somewhat due to injury, somewhat due to availability in terms of players being above him at Oklahoma. But when you look at who's in front of him, again, I love Jordan Shaw. I think he's going to play a lot this year.
Absolutely.
But yeah, as a starter, and this is no slight to this McCutcheon, that size, you just can't compete with it. And so I think there's going to be a role for Dyson on some level, and his ball skills are pretty good. So I think he'll be able to find a way to carve out some sort of role. But Justin Harrington, to me, man, if you could eat Price Hawk, Harrington, Jackson, you got all 6 foot and above corners right there. That's an incredible start just off the bat.
I really like where you're going with this because I wrote about Justin Harrington a little bit over on Huskies Wire, and everybody should go check that out as well because that was my exact thought process. And the one thing that I said was I feel there's a way that you can get him and Jordan Shaw on the field at the exact same time, where I'm really intrigued by a potential safety pairing, and depending on how it works out in fall camp, of Justin Harrington and Cam Broussard, who I'm going to get to in a sec because that's the first guy I want to talk about here. But I'm really intrigued what a pairing like that could look like because it's something that, with the Steve Belichick defense, we saw a lot of in New England with Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar on the field at the same time, where Duggar is the guy that, he can come down and be a thumper against the run. He can also drop back and play coverage and do all those same things, which is, and it's almost interchangeable in a sense, but I kind of, for this exercise and for where I was going with this, with my thought process, I put Justin Harrington in the Jabril Peppers role because he has the ability with that frame that you just talked about to come down and play linebacker and be an extra body and run support. And he can still play man against tight ends. He can still drop back and play, an underneath coverage in, a cover 1 or a cover 3, whatever it might be. And there are a whole lot of different ways that you can still get him involved in many different ways because of his athleticism, because of his size, and because of his strength, that he's somebody who is really, really interchangeable. And you can say the same thing about Cam Broussard, where I know I've said it before on the show and I want to double down on it, where, and I don't mean this as a slight to McAllister, I'm just really, really high on what Cam Broussard can do. If, we get the week 1 depth chart leading into the first game of the season and we see Cam Broussard listed as a starter, I'm not going to be surprised. I'm not. I love his range. I love his tackling ability. I love everything that he can do at all 3 levels of the field. I think he can really, really excel as a center fielder in Steve Belichick's defensive scheme. And just as the fall progresses, he's going to be somebody that I'm keeping a very, very close eye on.
I like where your head's at. I do have a follow-up, just to be clear, just to give you a chance to clarify something. Since you said Broussard and Harrington at safety, where are you putting Camp Ebb in that scenario? Is he behind both of those guys,
that was just sort of like a rotational thing that I was thinking of, where that, those 3 guys plus McAllister being a top 4, that was kind of my thought process there was, you can have, if that's your backup safety combination, that's fine. We know they're not going to be the starters, but if, one of those guys is starting, one of them comes off the bench in a rotation. I feel it's somewhat interchangeable there in the back end.
Okay, gotcha. I was going to say, that makes sense. I do think, again, I know I'm not going to air dirty laundry, but I'm just going to say give Camp Ebb the benefit of the doubt this season, given what he did last season. So with just in that regard, we don't want to say, hey, these new transfers are just going to push all these guys out, because Camp Ebb did, especially in that Pac-12 championship game, have an impact. One area that I know that we haven't really talked about a ton that maybe to be fair, won't play a huge role this season, but actually could, depending on how things change out, is Jayden Wayne at edge.
Yes.
Again, you have so many options with Lance Holtzclaw, Durfee, another guy we could probably talk about later from Sacramento State, who I'll probably leave for you to talk about. But in that regard, as a sophomore, played in, I believe, 8 or 9 games at Miami last season as a freshman. Didn't have a ton of production. Coming back, I think it's just coming back home, he might have a chance to pop. And when you look at speaking to the rotation, I think that's why I want to mention Jayden Wayne, because there's no necessarily guarantee maybe behind Zach Durfee in terms of coming off the edge and what they can do. And there's so many bodies at that position. I think Steve Belichick's scheme might be the perfect one to just, you know what, you might see 3 different edges on 3 different drives in the first half and just see which guys end up popping, and you play the hot hand until, you know, week 3 or 4 when the guys start to truly separate from each other. Because I think this roster, especially at edge, screams, you know what, we got a bunch of guys on the board. You figure out who's the best among you. And I think that's the perfect position for a guy like Jayden Wayne to be in, where I remember watching him at Lincoln and just seeing him as a stand-up edge. Well, first of all, seeing him at Lincoln as a flexed-out tight end was just criminal against Josiah Wagner. But that's a separate issue. But when he was lined up as an edge, you could see the body type was there. You could see what the end game could look like. And I'm really curious to see if Jason Kafusi is going to be able to pull that out of him, because this is a guy where he could have a couple sacks at the end of the season going into his then junior season, expecting to be a significant contributor. Whereas this season, especially coming off the freshman season in Miami, I wouldn't say the expectations are going to be through the roof, because that would be unfair to him. I certainly think there's a bar for him that where he could clear, you know, by game 5 or 6 to be significantly in the rotation this season.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you there. So I know you set me up perfectly there to talk about Deshaun Lynch. I'm not going to do it just because I know I've praised him over and over and over again. I'm going to continue to do so. Thank you. I actually really want to talk about Logan Sagapolu here, because I'm really intrigued at what, you talked about him the other day on the show, where he's listed at 6'2", 368 right now. We haven't seen somebody on this roster with that sort of size in a long time. And let's make one thing very clear. He's not Elijah Qualls. He's not Vita Vea. He's not those guys. Much love to Logan. I think he's going to have a really nice role in this defense. He's not those guys. But what I really do think that he's going to do a really great job of is opening up space for guys around him. Where this is somebody, we got to keep in mind, he's switching over from the offensive line where he played for 3-4 years in Miami. This is his first time playing defensive line in college. And I don't think he's going to be asked to do too much. I think that he's going to be asked to just be exactly what he is, a 6'2", pushing 370-pound guy that cannot be moved. And if he can eat up double teams, if he can do all these things, all of a sudden, Sebastian Valdez, who we know is a really nice pass rusher at Montana State, Javon Parker, who we've seen be a nice pass rusher in spurts, these are some of these other guys on the interior. If you can, Deshaun Lynch being, another big one, if you want to move him in there on passing downs, if you have a guy who can truly eat up those bodies in a way Greg Gaines did so well, in a way Vita did so well, even though it didn't matter when there were 4 guys on him, he would still throw him to the side and find a way to hit the quarterback. If you can find a way to just have somebody that can eat that space and create easier opportunities for the guys around you, that can do so much for any pass rush, because then you don't necessarily need to blitz as much. And when you do, maybe it's going to be more effective with a guy like that on the field. I don't know how much he's going to be asked to, truly do as a pass rusher or in pass rushing downs, but this is something that I think could be really, really beneficial for the defensive line, which has a lot of questions, as we know, as a whole. And this is a guy where, I don't think he needs to be a super all Big Ten caliber player for this to work. I think he needs to be what 2022 MJ Olay was, where all of a sudden he's a guy where it's, he's here. He's not necessarily making a huge impact. And I love MJ. I'll truly have nothing but praise for him, but you don't necessarily need to see his name show up in the stat sheet over and over and over again to know, okay, that's what kind of impact this guy is bringing to this team.
Exactly. It's a perfect comp. I mean, the high ceiling in terms of just body type reminds me of an old throwback to Sam Adams, young Sam Adams, not Sam Adams, the running back. Again, 6'2", 6'3", 350. It's a big, true nose guard, the guy that just moves, really plugs up half the line and takes up a couple of double teams that you can get an edge around or a second defensive tackle to have some pass rush. But yeah, he's not. I think MJL is a perfect comp for that because it's, again, one thing to consider. This is another 2-year player where I believe he could come back for a 6th season or another season in 25, if I'm not mistaken. So lay that foundation this season, and then potentially maybe, earn a second team Big Ten next season. Yeah, I necessarily wouldn't expect him to be first team or second team all Big Ten this season, but next season, absolutely, I think he could play himself into that after a year in the system and getting a full understanding of what the coaching staff wants him to do in that position.
No, I certainly see where you're going there. And Lars, I really like the insight on that. This has been a lot of fun, but I'm really excited to talk about some baseball. So let's start with the negative, and then let's get into the positive. Negative news, unfortunately, Lars, as you pointed out to me, Adrian Beltre Jr., the son of one of my favorite players of all time, Adrian Beltre, did decommit from Washington following the coaching change and everything. But we got to talk a little bit about Eddie Smith, because this is somebody who I'm really excited about, just what he can potentially bring here to Montlake, to just everything that he's shown over the course of his career. He did a really, really impressive job at Utah Valley. I was reading something that over his 3 years there, from his first season to when he left, he led one of the most impressive 2-year turnarounds in Division I baseball, where he took over a 10-win program and took him to within 1 game of the NCAA tournament. And that's something where, baseball on Montlake can be really, really special. It truly can be. There's somebody who I've done some baseball camps back when I was, still in middle school and elementary school, trying to make his way as a young baseballer in this world. I know what the allure of baseball at Washington can truly be. And I think that this is just the guy to do it. I do.
I agree. And I think the one thing that you hit on there, so I dug a little bit into those numbers. They won 30 games combined over their last 3 years before Eddie Smith showed up. They went 82 and 90. Now you might say it's a losing record. Why would we go get that guy? You have to consider the body of work. He wins 2 national
Take out the first
year
and then look at his record. Sorry, I just want to make sure, because take out his first season and they exploded in year 2.
And not only on top of that, what he did at Lower Columbia College for over 4 years from 2014 to 2017 in his first stint, winning 2 titles down there at a lower level, and taking some of those same players later on, not necessarily from that team from 2014 to 2018, but from Lower Columbia at Utah Valley. A couple of his better players at Utah Valley were transfers from the JC level. So I wrote about that on Athlon Sports, where as he builds this roster, that's one thing I asked him yesterday at the press conference, where in this modern age of transfer portal, how much are you going to be relying on some of those guys to patchwork, and how much of it is going to be built through the high school ranks? And the other thing to consider is he's a former Washington State, and I say that Evergreen State, not Washington State on the east side, Evergreen State from the state of Washington in Southwest Washington as a high school player. So he knows the value of players in the state. And I think that's going to be very important with the move to the Big Ten, knowing whatever the level of competition you want to say about the Big Ten baseball is, you can have your opinion on that. But when it comes to recruiting, it's really going to be built around the Northwest and the West Coast, maybe with some sprinkled transfers in, from other schools across the country. But I think especially for these next couple of seasons, having a guy that knows the in-state roads so well will allow him to find some of those JUCO guys that, give him some extra 150 ABs at the college, at the Big Ten level, see what you can do with that. And his track record for getting guys, when he said at the press conference, all I think about is helping guys hit and trying to make guys better at the plate, I don't think there's been any other statement that is more true. Just when you look at what he's done from LSU to Tulane with Dylan Cruz and all those guys, that's all he does. And I think for Washington, this is a perfect hire.
So you just threw me like 3 lobs, and now I have to try to throw them all down in succession. The first one is, I feel like he is exactly what Washington fans are always looking for. Somebody who's from the area, somebody who knows this area and is passionate about it in a very similar way to what Danny Sprinkle is, where his dad played football at UW. It's the same sort of character, just that same sort of mentality of, I know how special the University of Washington is, and that's what I want to do here. The second part is, you talked about that quote. So that was on a question I asked, and what he said immediately after that is exactly what I wrote about over on Huskies Wire. And because one thing that I was really, really curious about was his approach. During his time at Utah Valley, his team set school records in home runs, stolen bases, walks, hit by pitches. One of those doesn't seem so much like the other if you think about hit by pitches, but it still counts towards your OBP, toward that valuable on base percentage. And one of the first things he talked about was just kind of a refreshing breath of just a breath of fresh air is the best way to put it. When I think about, just what baseball is and where it is right now, is the most, even more important truly than batting average now, is OPS, on base plus slugging. And that was the first thing he said. He said, we are going to be built on OPS. Lars, I was on d1baseball.com earlier, and I was looking at team OPS among the 305 schools they have listed in Division I baseball. Out of those 305, do you know where the Huskies ranked last season in OPS?
310.
I like the thought process there. No, it was 280. It was 280. So still way down there. Yeah, no, you're not far off. No, you're not very far off. So it's really nice to hear that. Where when you look at all the hitting numbers last year, the Huskies were last in the Pac-12 in a good majority of major categories. OPS, hits. There are so many different ones where you go down and just, the offense was not pretty. There were certainly things that need to be cleaned up on the pitching side as well, but the offense really needs a shot in the arm. And it seems like he's just the guy to do that. And then the last part of the lobby threw me there was, I was so amped to talk about Dylan Crews because, as any everydayer who follows me on Twitter or anything knows, I'm a big baseball card guy. And Dylan Crews is one of the hottest names in just all of sports cards right now, just in terms of his upside and everything. He's a top 10 prospect in terms of Major League Baseball as a whole. And after being the number 2 overall pick in last year's draft by the Washington Nationals, right after Paul Skeens, so, we plugged our FanDuel read a little bit earlier. He's somebody who spent his freshman year with Eddie Smith. He's somebody who he helped develop him. He was one of the key pieces early on in his career. And Dylan Crews has gone on record and talked about, this is a guy who I really, really credit with a lot of my development, with a lot of the mindset that I was able to, learn early on in my time at LSU. It was all thanks to Eddie Smith. And now we're not saying that there's going to be a Dylan Crews at Washington in the next couple of years, but it's just nice to know that, it pays off and he can show, this is what I've been able to do for guys. And, it might not happen anytime soon, but he certainly has the track record that you're looking for.
Speaking of that was a perfect, 85 mile an hour changer for me to just turn and crush the other way. One thing you mentioned about, but I can go and get him. And that's what I'm going to go do with this point. Where you mentioned with Dylan Crews, one thing that I looked up at his past was I believe could have, I don't know if he was selected, but certainly could have gone pro out of high school. And decided to maintain his commitment to LSU after Eddie Smith was hired. And I have to wonder, part of that goes back to his time at Tulane, which is where he was at before LSU, where he built the number 1 recruiting class in the country at Tulane in 2019. At Tulane, according to the Perfect Game, to be clear. But Perfect Game, I trust their baseball more than ESPN or anything like that when it comes to recruiting rankings and stuff like that. So the fact that he can build a winner at Tulane with elite recruits and then build a winner at a lower level school like Columbia and Utah Valley. Same thing we talked about with Danny Sprinkle. Same thing we talked about with Jedd Fisch. Same thing we really talked about with every hire that has been made by Pat Chung and even just the general progression of the athletic department in general. All of the resources are there to succeed. You have to get the right people in the place. And that's another thing that we can maybe kind of wrap this up on is Eddie Smith and Danny Sprinkle both is kind of what I want to tie this thing together. Danny Sprinkle mentioned on our show, it's about getting the right people first. Get the right characters in the building. And as long as they can also play, that's also important too, but you have to be a good character person. Eddie Smith said the exact same thing. You want to get the right people who want to be at Washington, who belong at Washington. And if we need to develop them in their game and in a certain couple of ways to make them even better, we'll do that too. And this is why getting good characters good characters can develop good talent. It's hard to develop good talent if you have a bad character. And so I think that's part of being coachable. And it really ties into kind of the type of coach that Pat Chung wants to bring to Washington. And when you give these types of coaches who already have proven to be good winners at lower levels or in other places, just give them the resources that are at Washington and just watch them rush it and crush it 420 feet over Husky Park. That's exactly what I think Danny Sprinkle is going to do with the basketball team and what Eddie Smith is going to do with the baseball team.
I like your thought process there. And Lars, that being said, thank you so much for being here as always. Thank you all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. Stay tuned. We've got some more exciting announcements that we're going to be getting to in coming days, coming weeks, and everything. So the best way to make sure you're in tune with everything that's going on in the world of the University of Washington athletics, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. Please make sure to like the video, click that little bell so you never miss when we post something new. Might have some breaking stuff coming in the coming days. You never know. We'll see. And if you got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, make sure to drop them right down below in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, and we'll talk to you on Friday.